Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Every American is born with inherent rights. That's what our founding documents say, and the purpose of the U.S. government is to protect those rights. That has been our national creed for hundreds of years, and it's worked. But the left no longer believes it. Progressives have decided that the Bill of Rights applies only to people who agree with them. Their views are protected by the First Amendment. Your views are hate speech. The Second Amendment covers their security detail. You can't be trusted to have a gun at home. Now the activist left is telling us that people who disagree with them no longer have freedom of movement or association. They can't go to the movies or go to restaurants. If they dare leave their homes, they will be surrounded by mobs and threatened. It's happening. Last Friday, White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders and her family were forced to leave a restaurant in Virginia because the owner didn't like their politics. Sanders and her husband went home, but the rest of their family went to another restaurant. That wasn't good enough. They had committed the sin of being related to someone who works at the White House. So progressives continued to harangue them as they tried to eat. This is happening in a lot of places to a lot of people. Protesters, for example, have massed outside the home of White House aide Stephen Miller. In case their intentions weren't clear enough, they put up mock wanted posters with Miller's face on them. A DHS employee, meanwhile, found a burned, decapitated animal carcass on his front porch. Again, the message is crystal clear. Activists on the left are moving toward violence. They are aware of this, and some applaud it. A piece yesterday in Splinter News, which is owned by Univision, explained that intimidating Trump supporters in public places is, quote, just the minimum baseline here. This is all going to get more extreme, and it should, end quote. How extreme? Well, the article fondly recalls the domestic terror bombings of the 1970s. Thousands a year in America. That's our future, the article says. Unfortunately, we're headed there fast. Over the weekend in Los Angeles, Congresswoman Maxine Waters urged the mob to hunt down and find members of the president's cabinet. Here's part of it.
If you think we're rallying now, you ain't seen nothing yet. Already, you have members of your cabinet that are being booed out of restaurants, who have protesters taking up at their house, who's saying no peace, no sleep. No peace, no sleep. Let's stay the course. Let's make sure we show up wherever we have to show up. And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere.
Maxine Waters isn't just any member of Congress. The Daily Beast calls her, quote, a folk hero. BuzzFeed describes her as the unchallenged new face of the Democratic Party. And indeed she is. She's also a self-described civil rights leader, which makes it a little weird to see her demanding that certain people be denied public accommodations. Sorry, we don't serve your kind at the lunch counter. That's exactly what she is saying, and she said it again yesterday.
I stand by my speech in saying that the protests have already started. They're probably going to continue.
The message of all this is clear. The left no longer considers its political opponents fellow citizens or even human. How long before they start openly calling for something bad to happen to those opponents? Well, in the case of Maxine Waters, it won't be the first time. In 1992, Waters cheered as racist mobs burned Los Angeles. As she put it at the time, riot is the voice of the unheard. When Reginald Denny was dragged from his truck and nearly murdered for the color of his skin, beaten in the head with a cinder block on camera, Waters championed his attackers. She partied with them after their trial. Maxine Waters has a record of endorsing mob violence. Everyone in Washington knows that. Democrats don't care. To his credit, Chuck Schumer did call Waters' most recent remarks, quote, not American. Good for him. But hardly anyone else said anything. Nancy Pelosi blamed Donald Trump for what Waters said. That was a theme. Stop hitting me, they said as they threw the first punch.
I feel that we are in pre-Nazi Germany. The stages of things that are occurring on a daily basis, the obfuscation, the lies, the totalitarian behavior is shocking and horrendous. And we have to be vigilant.
They follow the exact pattern that Hitler has. He is evil. He is evil. And the thing is, I thought, oh, he'll come in and he won't really know because he's not that smart. He doesn't, he'll just do a showmanship thing. But he's evil.
This is about racism. This is pure and simple racism. That's all this is. The people who support him are frightened to death of this country becoming the Browning of America.
Something interesting has happened. As progressives become more authoritarian and less tolerant, they seem more convinced that they're fighting actual Nazis rather than their fellow Americans with whom, in the scheme of things, they have only relatively mild political differences. The more they accuse the administration of extremism, the more extreme they become. And that's not surprising, because once you decide that the people who disagree with you are Nazis, everything is allowed. Why wouldn't you threaten them in restaurants or burn their houses down, or who knows? This could very well end in tragedy. You start talking like this and you don't know where it's going to go. Some progressives seem to welcome all that. Quentin James, who's the head of a political action committee that supports Democrats, recently announced that those calling for calm are, quote, accomplices of the current administration. Accomplices? This is the language of total war. It's scary. It has no place in politics. We're heading towards something awful. And the only people who can stop it are the adults on the left. And there are still some. Democratic members of Congress, entertainment figures, religious leaders, media chieftains like Jeff Zucker at CNN or Andy Lack at NBC. They're silent now, cowering and complicit in all of this, but the country badly needs them to cool the rhetoric and rein in the mob. No more Nazi talk on their TV channels. No more screaming at people in restaurants. There's a point of no return, and we are approaching it, and we need their help to pull back. Peter Kirsanow is on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, and he joins us tonight. Peter, thank you for coming on.
Good to be back.
Given everything you've seen, what would happen if the people who are encouraging mob intimidation and extremism, and they are encouraging it openly, what would happen if they took the reins of actual power in this country?
You know, there's been maybe 2 instances in the history of the United States where this kind of activity has been replicated, and I would think that one of them might be the Reconstruction era, where you had a resistance in the South resisting the results of the Civil War and the reunification of the country.
Right.
And you had public officials exhorting private citizens to deprive other private citizens of their rights to public accommodations, to privileges and immunities that are secured to all citizens and were secured by the Civil War. That has only happened once before in our history, where public officials are actually exhorting private citizens. In that case, the private citizens they were exhorting were the Klan, who was the military ring at the time essentially of the Southern Democrats, to deprive blacks of their rights under the law and also deprive them of public accommodations. You might say that Jim Crow era, but you might have a singular governor of a southern state who might stand in a schoolhouse door, but they weren't actually exhorting private citizens that much to do so, although that did occur. But now we have this, and it's extraordinary because I think we're at this inflection point for a host of reasons, but the framers gave us a Republican system of governance to shield us against mob violence and the passions of the day. But that depended really on 2 things, and that is a informed electorate, informed citizenry, and responsible elected officials. As to the former, we have now a extremely biased media that doesn't really inform but proselytizes and harangues and acts as an organ for one particular side to get their viewpoint out. And our educational system hasn't been teaching effective history for 30 years now. And with respect to responsible elected officials, if you think back to, the last 50 years or so, it's difficult to imagine, or go back throughout our history, it's difficult to imagine any of the founding fathers, a Madison, a Jefferson, a Lincoln, a Roosevelt, an Eisenhower, Reagan, doing the kind of inflaming of the electorate the way we see some elected officials doing. But even aside from that, not inflaming it, but not even trying to tamp down the passions and the rhetoric that the founders understood were anathema to an effectively governed republic.
This is an inflection point. You're exactly right, and you put it in the perfect perspective. Thank you very much. Peter Kirsanow, it's always great to see you.
Thanks, Tucker.
Robert Patillo is an attorney and an activist, and he joins us tonight. Robert, thank you for coming on. So
Thanks, Tucker.
If progressive activists have a right to intimidate and scream at people they disagree with politically in public places, in restaurants, for example, or outside their homes, What are the boundaries of that? I mean, do you have a right to show up at someone's kid's soccer game and scream at the parents? Do you have a right to show up at the person's church, at their parents' funeral? I mean, what are the boundaries now in this new activism on the left?
Well, Tucker, one thing that I think is important, you started off the segment by talking about the First Amendment rights and freedom of speech. What Maxine Waters said to her supporters was to exercise your freedom of speech. If you see somebody who is in power, confront them, speak to them about the issues. We're in a swamp territory in D.C. right now where individuals only listen to lobbyists and to special interest groups. If the only time you get to speak to elected officials is when they're in public, then by all means, don't commit violence, don't commit anything that will harm the individual, but let them know how you feel. People have the right to exercise their First Amendment rights.
I'm actually, it's a little stunning for me to take a lecture about the First Amendment from anyone on the left who've been working overtime for the past couple of years to curtail our First Amendment rights, who invented this fake category of hate speech, et cetera. But leaving that aside, this is not a debate about anyone's right to speak. It's a debate about whether it's appropriate to scream at people in public and to force them out of, for example, restaurants. This is not an attempt to win them over or to show them another side of the issue. It's an effort to intimidate them. You can't read it any other way. You're not telling me they were trying to inform Sarah Huckabee Sanders. They were punishing her.
Look, Tucker, the entire point is that because these members of the administration don't talk to the American people, they don't have regular press briefings, they don't go out and have town hall meetings, this is the only time that individuals have the opportunity to speak with them.
What do you mean? Trump just preempted our show yesterday. Wait, hold on. Come on.
There's a difference between a
yesterday,
speech,
the president,
a speech and a town hall.
But you said they don't give press briefing. Look, we hear a lot from the administration. We hear a lot from its opponents. I welcome that almost uniquely on television. I like debates. I'm glad that you are here. We disagree. I think we should have a conversation. You do not have the right to scream at me in front of my children in a restaurant, surround my house on the weekend when my kids are home, come to my church, go to their soccer games, go to my parents' funerals. Do you see the difference between having a debate over the issues and intimidating people in the public space?
Well, let's understand that the entirety of this issue started with a lack of messaging on the part of the administration, by not explaining what the detention policy is, by not explaining what exactly is happening to these children. If the president and the administration want to have a conversation about this, do like other administrations have done. Go do town halls around the country. Speak to voters. Let the people express their feelings to the administration. Understand what public opinion is. Don't simply hide behind the walls of power. And nobody's going to people's soccer games or funerals.
It's not my job.
They're saying confront these people in public.
Well, those are public spaces, and I guess the point I'm making is once you start describing people you disagree with politically as Nazis, as the worst category of almost non-human beings, you are almost by definition encouraging, first of all, you're closing out any possibility of agreement or compromise, and you're basically saying, hurt them. I mean, what do you do to, honestly, I'm being sincere with you, what do you do to a Nazi? If you really thought Nazis were taking over the country, you know what I would do? I would consider force. I don't want to be governed by Nazis. So that's why we don't talk that way, because it, by its definition, encourages violence, right?
But no, Tucker, let's understand that during the Obama administration, he was accused of being everything from a Muslim sleeper cell, not an American citizen. This is what happens. Joe Walsh yelled out, "You lie," during a presidential address. The discourse that we have in this nation has become caustic. Somebody has to fix the issue. But right now, when you have an administration that refuses to speak to the American people, it's difficult to get in there.
Okay, again, it's not my job to flack for the White House. But holy smokes, he just did an hour-long live event yesterday. He's doing an hour-long live event tomorrow. I mean, they speak a lot. That's not really the issue. The issue is whether you have a right to take political differences and turn them into some kind of mob retaliation against the people you disagree with. Can we just agree on this? Maybe the left should stop calling people Nazis. Maybe that's too far. Maybe that is setting the table for something awful. Can we agree on that? Or is it okay to liken people to Adolf Hitler? I mean, for real.
Look, Tucker, we can agree on that, but can also the right not support the Charlottesville actual Nazis who are walking around with swastikas? That's what Foment says. You have to condemn those Nazis.
I mean, I've never met anybody who would support it. Okay, look, I've never met anybody who would. I mean, I agree with that. Okay, but it's one thing to say of someone who is espousing, I guess, Nazi views, you're a Nazi. But to say about someone who disagrees with you on immigration policy, you're a Nazi, what you're saying is, I don't need to win you over, debate you. What I need to do is destroy you. And that's what the left is saying, isn't it?
I think what happens is when you do not condemn, we do not condemn people like David Duke, we do not condemn the neo-Nazis in Charlottesville, then you get your issues conflated with them. Well, as I said, there's a difference between doing an hour-long speech to people and having a town hall where you speak with people and get their input, get their side of the conversation, and present public policy that helps all people.
Yeah, okay. Robert, thank you. Fox senior political analyst Britt Hume joins us tonight. Britt, I don't want to be hysterical or read too much into this, but it does seem like we've moved, and you have more perspective than I, to a place where there's no possibility of compromise, where one side sees the other really as something that must be destroyed.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Tucker. Consider this. When Maxine Waters next rises on the House floor, she will be recognized by the presiding officer as the gentle lady from California. Now, there may not be that many people right now who think she's either gentle or a lady, but that is the custom of the House. Members address each other as ladies and gentlemen. In the Senate, members are discouraged from ever addressing each other directly on the Senate floor. They are to speak to the presiding officer, calling him Mr. President. If they want to mention a fellow member, they will often refer to him as something like, I disagree with the distinguished senator from wherever. There's a reason for these customs, and they are this: that political debates can become heated, they become quickly personal, and they can devolve into the kind of brutal and bitter name-calling that we've seen lately, in which the most extraordinarily harsh things are said about one another, and that in turn can lead to violence. Consider this. In 1856, as most people who've studied American history know, a senator from Massachusetts named Charles Sumner was nearly to death on the Senate floor by a Southern member from South Carolina who disagreed with him on the issue that divided us so deeply then, and that, of course, was slavery. We are seeing and hearing some of the same kinds of harsh rhetoric today that we heard in that era, and it is dangerous. It is dangerous, as Steve Scalise can tell you. Certainly Charles Sumner's relatives can tell you that as well. This is the reason why these institutions recognize that this kind of talk and behavior has consequences, and they can be quite severe.
Wouldn't it be helpful if the adults on the left stood up and said that? Look, you don't have to like Trump, and we disagree with some of the issues. I get it. But you can't call people Nazis anymore. Maybe the people at the other channels should say, you can't call people Nazis on our air. Like, you can't. That's too far. Why is nobody saying anything like that on the left?
Well, let me suggest something here, Tucker. The president certainly deserves his share of the responsibility for this, because he has tossed about the harshest kind of language toward his critics. It seems that no slight is too small for him not to have a nuclear reaction over, and he says the strongest things. But there's a cycle here. The president will say or tweet something that is characteristically not terribly precise and very often exaggerated. His critics will respond to it by taking the worst possible, most extreme interpretation of what he has said, and they will react to it accordingly. And the spiral then begins. And pretty soon, you know, you're hearing him accused. Consider this over the weekend, Tucker. The president mused about how we shouldn't have to go through a laborious and time-consuming legal process to keep illegal border crossers from getting into this country. And he was immediately accused of being authoritarian and of trying to eliminate people's due process. Well, and the fact of the matter is that what he described is precisely the way that many countries deal with illegal border crossers, and the way some of them are dealt with by this country now. But that was lost on countless critics. I mean, the Washington Post, in a front-page news story, described that as an attack on the judicial system. This is where we go with this, and it is. And once you start this sort of stuff, this sort of exaggerated reaction, it spirals and can spiral out of control, which is what I think you are worried about, and what I know I certainly am worried about. We need in America, as we argue with each other, to keep a civil tongue.
I agree with that. It's getting too confronting people in public. It's too much.
Unbelievable.
Britt, thank you. Great to see you.
Thank you.
Supreme Court today handed the White House a victory, upholding its travel ban. Details on that are next. One of the very first acts of the current administration has been vindicated after nearly a year and a half. Today, the Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of the president's travel ban. The left reacted in its typically restrained way. The New Republic tweeted, quote, "If it wasn't clear before, it should be now. Democrats should prepare to pack the Supreme Court." David Tafuri is a lawyer and was a foreign policy advisor to Barack Obama's presidential campaigns. He joins us now. David, thanks for coming on. So here you have a ban that didn't mention Muslims, that did not restrict immigration from the biggest Muslim countries, that did restrict immigration from non-Muslim countries like North Korea, and yet somehow is a Muslim ban. Can we just admit now that that was probably the dumbest talking point ever, and that it was a lie?
You know, Tucker, I was on your show exactly 1 year ago today to argue about this with you. 1 year ago, the Supreme Court issued its decision that overturned the halt on the ban. That was the second ban. A lot has changed since then, but in some ways nothing has changed. Now, the Supreme Court has made its final ruling on the third ban. Now, that third ban is different from the second ban and much different from the first ban. But in the end, there are many who still believe that the purpose of the ban was to ban Muslims from coming to the country. And there is some support for that. So what I think is that this is still really bad policy for the country. There are some good legal arguments now that the Supreme Court took hold of, and the majority, a very thin majority, by the way, 5-4, used to rule in favor of the ban and to support the ban. However, this is still bad policy because we are still banning lots of Muslims. We're still banning lots of Muslims who are not a security threat, and we're not banning many of the Muslims, like some Muslims from some countries who actually have engaged in terrorist acts here in the United States.
So how would we know, for example, if an immigrant is from Afghanistan, Somalia, Syria? Do we trust those governments to keep close track of the records of the people who are coming here? That's a rhetorical question. The answer is obviously not. So why would we even take any risk at all, since we don't know, we can't know, we never will know exactly who they are?
Well, obviously, the administration thinks it knows. That's why it's taken the time to ban people from certain countries. It thinks it can figure out what country a certain person is from.
But don't we know, can we just agree that if you're coming here from Somalia, it doesn't have a government functional enough to keep track of who you are and to pass on any applicable or relevant records about you? It's a dysfunctional place. Same with Afghanistan. Same, I would argue, Syria, under the conditions of the civil war right now. So, like, who would disagree with that? Do we trust the government of Somalia to tell us the truth?
Actually, even the Trump administration disagrees with you about Somalia. When the Trump administration,
well, they may, but I'm not. But they're not here. I'm asking. But hold on, I'm asking you. What do you think of that? I mean, do you trust the government of Somalia to vet for us the people from Somalia who come here? That's insane, right? And I don't care what the Trump administration thinks. It's obviously crazy.
Well, I mean, we have to trust somebody, right? So when DHS and the experts in DHS and the State Department did a review, but when they did a review, they concluded, actually this administration concluded, that Somalia did have some procedures in place that warranted it not to be in the ban. Then it was put back in the ban.
Wait a second. Why would? But hold on. Why would I trust some bureaucrat at the State Department with my country and my children? How would we know? Let's be specific. Let's be honest here. So the State Department, I don't care whose administration is telling us, no, don't worry about it. We trust the government of Somalia. Why shouldn't I laugh at them when they say something so self-evidently stupid and dishonest to me?
A couple reasons. First of all Americans do deserve to be secure, and we need to put in place things to protect us. But with respect to Somalia, any immigrant that's going to seek a visa to come here, they are going to go through a review process, and those review processes generally work. And our people here who review a Somalian applying for a visa, they don't trust the Somalian government. They look at the documents, they do vetting, they do an interview.
Oh, do we have a lot of people on that?
How many people on the ground?
This is also stupid. We don't have anybody on the ground in Somalia. Honestly, how many State Department employees are vetting the many hundreds of thousands of Somali refugees who've come to this country? How many are there in refugee camps in Kenya or in Somalia? 8?
That's a great question.
I mean, honestly, do we have thousands of them? Yeah,
actually, the interviews don't take place in Somalia for that reason. The Somalians who want a visa, they have to go to Djibouti. So they have to travel to Djibouti. They have to go to the U.S. Embassy in Djibouti, and they have to go to the review process right there.
So, but we can't vet any of it because Somalia is not a functioning country. So actually, none of it's vetted. It's all make-believe, and bureaucrats under all these administrations are lying to us, and we're just sort of nodding like sheep. Oh, I'm sure it's fine. It's not fine, actually, at all.
Well, the statistics show it is fine.
Because we've had 30 years. No, actually, they don't show that at all.
No American has been killed by a Somalian who came to the United States.
Right, and how much money to Somali terror groups Al-Shabaab have, has flown from Minneapolis in the last 15 years? Anyway, we're out of time, unfortunately. But if you can tell me how we're vetting these people, I'd be assured to know. David Jafari, great to see you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.
Hillary Clinton's excuses tour continues to circle the globe. We'll show you her latest triumph of blame shifting and excuse mongering next. Not exactly the Rolling Stones on tour, but Hillary Clinton's Endless Excuses World Tour is doing a brisk business still. Clinton was recently in the United Kingdom, where she began complaining about the American electoral system. Here's a selection.
Now, in the U.S., it was a perfect storm. Deep currents of anger and resentment flowing through our culture. A political press that told voters my emails were the most important story. Unprecedented intervention in our election by the FBI. And an information warfare campaign waged from the Kremlin.
Waged from the Kremlin. The darkest recesses of the Kremlin, no doubt. But the 2016 election is still a topic of conversation. The president himself brought it up last night during his rally in South Carolina. Here's a selection from that.
She writes a book and she does a tour, and how many reasons did she give for losing the election? Like every week it was a different reason, right? She blamed everybody for losing the election except for one person, herself.
Tammy Bruce is a radio show host in New York and obviously a frequent and treasured guest on the show, and she joins us tonight. Tammy, I don't want to carry water for the Kremlin, but I can't resist asking, what do you think this is about? I've asked you this many times, but I'm still baffled.
Well, look, and it really matches what you've been discussing earlier in the show about the left-wing reaction to the election. Based in emotion, no facts. It has nothing to do with policy. It has everything to do with just some self-obsession, if you will, and rage. So here you've got, she's on foreign soil, in addition, Tucker, doing this. And yet now she's also not even confronting Trump about policy or about she would have better ideas. And this is the problem. In that speech, she also compared him to Turkey's tyrannical Erdogan. A man who just got reelected, and that in and of itself is a remarkable dynamic. But she still, personally, for some reason, can't resolve the fact that she failed, that this was not going to happen. And indeed, when she talks about a Russian conspiracy, it really was about the simple, basic decisions in the campaign, like not going to Wisconsin, as an example. Very basic campaign decision-making that I think contributed to that failure.
So you think this is an example of a public figure basically living out her emotional life in public?
Yes, and look, as a woman, and I want women in power, and we're terrific leaders, the fact that this has become almost a stereotypical cartoon of what happens with a woman, misogynists argue that women aren't rational, that we don't look and deal with the issues properly, that we can't be reasoned with. This is not helpful. And it is a shame, and at the same time here,
right.
she's arguing, when she argues against the Electoral College as an example, she's arguing that the entire Republican structure of the United States is at fault as well, that it's the founders now who are the problem, who are now to be blamed. I think that she's a representation also of what's happening here at home with the left and what's going on now with all of the harassment and violence.
Not helpful. That is exactly right. I think candidly, a lot of people who support her probably feel that way too, but they can't admit it.
Yeah.
Tammy Bruce, thank you for that.
Thanks for having
elucidation.
Thank you.
President Trump's new executive order has not halted the crisis on the border, unfortunately. One U.S. senator says American officials are ignoring those directives and actively encouraging illegal immigration into our country. That senator joins us next. The new executive order out of the White House is intended to end family separations while still maintaining zero tolerance toward illegal immigration, but it may not be working or even close to working. Yesterday, the head of the Border Patrol said his agency has stopped referring adults for criminal prosecution if they cross the border with minors. Meanwhile, thousands of families and unaccompanied minors continue to arrive at the border, overwhelming our ability to even process them. Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin chairs the Senate Homeland Security Committee. He joins us tonight. Senator, thank you for coming on. So any president can issue an executive order. The question is, can you make the agencies, the bureaucrats, carry it out? And I think the question that many of us have is, are the many bureaucrats working for this administration in sync with his policy priorities? Are they actually trying to curb illegal immigration into this country, do you think?
Well, they are forced to follow the laws of this country. And that's part of the problem, is we have laws that really prohibit us from being able to prosecute the people coming to this country illegally and keep the family units together. We don't have the capacity in terms of beds. And so we do have to follow the laws, and it's the laws, it's the legal precedents, it's the loopholes that have really created this mess, and that's what Congress needs to fix.
So it sounds like the laws are 100% weighted on the side of foreign citizens breaking our laws.
Yes.
Against the interests of American citizens who run this government and pay for it and on whose behalf it exists. Is that correct?
Pretty much, right. We have, for example, the Feinstein Amendment in the human trafficking law was the one that said that DHS can only hold, CBP can only hold a child for 72 hours. Then we have to turn that child over to HHS. And, of course, HHS has no capability of deporting those children. And so those children, the ones that have come in, about more than 200,000, have come in since 2012, kind of sparked by DACA. Those children, 96.5% of those are still in this country. And that's just reality. And so that fuels additional unaccompanied children from Central America. And then the way we handle family units under President Obama, because, again, you can't keep the children with adults if you're going to prosecute them, put them in adult detention facilities. So you also have to separate those children. And as a result, the Obama administration kept the families together, and that was called catch and release. And if we do not detain people coming to this country illegally, they don't show up for hearings, and it's impossible to deport them. So we have this flood. Tucker, it's been about 900,000 people minimum coming in family units and unaccompanied children from Central America since 2012. 900,000. We have 3,300 beds in certified, family detention facilities. We got about 40,000 beds for adults detained. We've got 900,000 coming in here since 2012. So we simply don't have the capacity.
So I'm not a progressive, so I don't assume that everyone I disagree with is evil. I think there have got to be some Democrats who see this crisis for what it is, a crisis that hurts the country. Are you familiar with any legislation sponsored by Democrats on the Hill, backed by Democrats on the Hill, that would address this crisis meaningfully? Any?
I'm really not, because they, by and large, want open borders. But we do know it works. Michael Chertoff, when he was Secretary of Homeland Security, faced a similar crisis in 2005 when we had an influx of Brazilians coming in, about 31,000 in 2005. He instituted a policy of apprehending, processing, and returning them to Brazil very quickly, called Texas Hold'em. And within a year, that number was down to 1,400. Within 3 years, it was below 1,000. So we found out through that process that rapid deportation, returning those individuals that don't have valid asylum claims, actually discourages further illegal immigration. We've done the exact opposite during the Obama administration. And then when President Trump tries to enforce the law, he finds out that there's just legal precedent as well as a lack of capacity to actually do it.
Exactly. When you enforce the law, people are more likely to obey the law. I mean, duh.
What a concept.
Senator, thank you. Yeah, what a concept. I appreciate it. Good to see you.
Have a good night.
Meanwhile, in Great Britain, a man called Tommy Robinson is still languishing in prison. His crime was attempting to cover a rape trial. No one wanted to hear it, so he's behind bars. An update on his case next. Welcome back. We've got a Fox News alert. There's something going on, and we don't want to overstate this because we have virtually no details. But something is happening on the tarmac at JFK Airport in New York. There's a JetBlue flight parked there. There's a ladder from it. People appear to be going up. It is surrounded by law enforcement, apparently some of them federal. There's at least one report that no one in the cockpit is communicating with the tower. We cannot confirm that or anything about this other than the pictures you are seeing. Again, JetBlue flight on the tarmac at JFK. Entirely possible that there's a non-sinister explanation for all of this. We don't know, and we don't want to suggest we do. But it is happening, and we wanted to tell you about that. And, of course, we'll bring you more information if and when we get it in this hour. But first, For centuries, Great Britain was the forefront of human freedom. That country gave us the freedom of speech and of the press. It led efforts to abolish the slave trade and slavery itself, and God bless them for that. Of course, that country created the common law, due process rights that we take for granted today, and a lot more. But freedom in Britain is on the decline now, dramatically. Tommy Robinson, for example, sits in jail tonight for the crime of reporting on a child grooming trial, a rape trial. Meanwhile, a judge is calling for the mass blunting of kitchen knives in the UK in response to a wave of knife attacks, as if that's the cause or the solution. It's a mess. Anne-Marie Waters is the founder of the For Britain political party, and she joins us tonight. So thanks so much for coming on. By the way, those of us who are not in the UK sort of looked on in stunned surprise at what has happened to Tommy Robinson, and more than that, at the lack of response from the cultural establishment in Great Britain to what is being done to him in retaliation for speaking what he thinks is true. Has there been any complaint from the media establishment in your country about what's going on?
Oh, absolutely not. Tommy Robinson is persona non grata as far as the mainstream media is concerned, as well as various human rights groups. They ignore any persecution of people that they don't politically agree with. And Tommy Robinson is one of many people who faces and has faced, would continue to face, persecution of some kind. If you say anything negative, even if you don't go along with the positive, the endless praise of Islam in this country, you will find some form of persecution, whether it's by the state in terms of arresting people for Islamophobic comments, or from the media, who will immediately denounce you as racist and fascist and far right, regardless of what your political views may be. If you speak negatively about Islam, you are rendered far right. And then persona non grata, so that the mainstream media is not interested at all in speaking up for Tommy Robinson or anyone else who speaks negatively about Islam. There is a persecution, and as you say, our freedoms are rapidly being eroded, and rapidly, even more rapidly, in just the last few years. Things are really declining in terms of political freedoms in Britain. It's very, very worrying, and it's very serious. And the media is not talking about it at all, which of course makes it even more serious.
It's stunning. You don't have to take a position on Islam itself to take a position in favor of the freedom of speech, which you bequeathed the world, and now it's dying in your country. Anne, that is a sad story, but I'm glad to hear it from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, speaking of... Looks like they're going to bulldoze The Little House on the Prairie. The classic children's books by Laura Ingalls Wilder are the latest works to run afoul of the left-wing cultural revolution now in progress. The Association for Library Service to Children just renamed its Laura Ingalls Wilder Award to the Children's Literature Legacy Award. The reason, you knew this, is that The Little House on the Prairie books apparently somehow promote racism, sexism, and many other isms, every ism you can imagine. Melissa Francis is one of the smartest people who works in TV, by the way. She hosts After the Bell on Fox Business. She's the author of Lessons from the Prairie, and she played Cassandra Ingalls on Little House on the Prairie on television. So she's well situated to respond to this. She joins us tonight. What do you make of this charge? I don't even understand it.
It's astonishing. So when I was writing that book, you just saw Lessons from the Prairie. I reread all of the books, and it is astonishing how equal women are in these books, because to their own physical detriment, they are risking life and limb on the pioneering just alongside the men. The women described are working outside the home. They're selling things. This was written by a woman, and they say that the book represents outdated cultural ideas. Well, I was looking at some of the other winners on their list. Growing Up in Slavery, Stories of Young Slaves as Told by Themselves. I bet you there are some outdated notions about culture in that book as well.
Yes, I bet there are.
Which is why we read these historical accounts, to educate ourselves and understand our culture, where we came from, mistakes we've made in the past, strengths of our founding. You would read both of these works, and here, this is a strong female author. By the way, it's a lead female character. Even the show, you know, in Hollywood had a lead female character. The Me Too movement is all about women aren't getting the roles in Hollywood. That's part of it, that they aren't getting a fair shake. Here, this is like an all-woman project, basically. If you look at Laura Ingalls Wilder, writing about her family, about her mother's life on the frontier. And I mean, there are scenes where Ma is building a house with Pa. They drop the log on Ma's leg. She continues to build the house with her husband, just the two of them, with a broken foot. I mean, talk about equal rights. I'm not sure I want those equal rights, but that's equal rights. I mean, it's just astonishing to me. My conclusion is these people didn't read the books. They just didn't read the books.
The revolution is not only sinister, it's dumb. But you made some characteristically very smart, insightful points. Melissa Francis, great to see you. Thank you.
You too. Thank you.
Well, that is about it for us tonight. Tune in every night at 8 p.m. to the show that is the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. DVR it if you figure out how that works. And more than anything, stay tuned to Fox. There's a lot going on. Sean Hannity is sitting in New York City right now to take you into the next hour.